Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 139, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
And hello, if you are listening on Spotify.
Oh.
We're finally on there.
Finally listed on Spotify. This is fantastic news. So you can get us on multiple devices, on all networks now.
I did have a guy last week, when I play the sound effect, he goes, your show's turning into Steve Wright in the afternoon. But, Spotify is something that we've been trying to get on for, probably about 2 years now?
Yeah, because it was a kind of curated list, so they picked the podcast, which is really nice of them to consider us.
Yeah, and they do. They kind of look at podcasts that are going to fit into the rest of their catalogue and what's going to complement them. And we've really got to big up our new provider, Audio Boom, for helping us get on there as well. Now, we did say this on last week's show. I know people dip in and out of episodes, but you do need to change over your RSS feeds if you need to do it manually. Or if you listen on SoundCloud at the moment, you need to start using Audio Boom. So I think there was still about 3,000 people listening on SoundCloud last weekend. If you listen on iTunes or Google Play or most apps, it should change over on its own, but, the show is hosted now on Audio Boom, and we're going to phase SoundCloud out in the next couple of months.
Yeah, and we're going to repeat this a lot because not everybody listens to every episode. Yeah. So they'll be like, oh, why has it disappeared?
By December, when we come off SoundCloud, I want 2 people to be listening on there, not 3,000. So, we'll put all that information if you need to change your RSS feeds. Like I said, for most people, your apps will do it. Your mobile apps will all do it automatically. We're working with those at the moment. But if you need the feeds manually, all you've got to do is head to our website at theretrohour.com. Now, what a show we've got this week. A topic that actually is very close to my heart, but not really something that we've covered on this podcast a lot, actually, quite amazingly.
Yeah, so we're talking to Bill Rehbock, and Bill is fantastic. He worked for Atari, and his kind of job was hunting down the games for the Jaguar.
Yeah.
So, he got Doom, which was just an amazing port, and Alien vs. Predator. But then he also went on to work with the new one.
Yeah.
And
what is the new one then for people that might not know?
Well, the new one was a DVD kind of gaming system, and a lot of Atari X staffers joined there and tried to make this new universal DVD format that you could play games on. So we're going to cover that, and we're going to cover stuff like the legendary Atari Falcon.
Yeah, because, a lot of people think of me and you as Amiga fanboys, which admittedly we are. But, the Atari Jaguar is the only console I collect for.
I'm an Amiga fanboy, but when I saw a Falcon and the video playback on there, I knew that was better than the Amiga 1200's video playback. So you couldn't deny that.
Well, the thing is about Atari, it was a really interesting company, and they went through so much change as well. And normally, what I really like about this interview with Bill is when you normally hear podcasts talking about Atari or YouTube videos and that, they're always going on about the Atari 2600.
Or the arcade era,
Yeah, it's all like, the late 70s, early 80s. But really, the bit that really interests me is that bit in the middle after Jack Tramiel took over and, they went into computers. They were really a business computer company for a few years.
Yeah, totally. Bill Rehbock, when he started, he was doing desktop publishing,
yeah.
And that's not the route you'd expect to get into Atari.
Well, the Atari ST had the nickname, the Jackintosh. It was essentially, a lot of people saw it as a low-cost Apple Mac alternative. It had a really good high-res monitor that you could do desktop publishing on, and obviously had some good games on there as well. Later on, the Lynx, one of the best handhelds at the time, probably was. I actually got a Lynx last week, so I'm getting up to speed on that catalogue now as well. And then the Jaguar, which really was one of the biggest techno tragedies of the early 90s, really. A lot of things went against it, but, as you'll hear in this interview, John Carmack actually loved it so much, he sat down, did his own Doom engine on it, and, at the time it had the best console version of Doom on there.
Yeah, and we also find out about stuff like connections with Sony and with Next and stuff that you really did not expect. So you're going to enjoy this one, folks. Yeah,
so do hang around. Bill Rehbock, the story of Atari in the 90s, is our special guest on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. Now, before we get into that, we have got a little competition this week as well.
Well, this is a story of the rival company, isn't it? So this is the inside story of Commodore by ex-MD David Pleasance.
Now, obviously, we've had David on the show before. You and I are good friends with David. We were hanging out with him the other weekend. He was playing his guitar, wasn't he, at one of our friends' birthday parties?
Yeah, rocking some flamenco.
He was. And we're actually going to be with him this weekend as well in Cambridge. at the Computer Museum in Cambridge for their Retro Computer Festival. Now, admittedly, it's a bit short notice, but it's going to be happening tomorrow at the time the show comes out on the 15th and 16th of September. Loads of stuff going on if you're near Cambridge this weekend. We're going to be there tomorrow on Saturday. David's going to be there as well all weekend signing his book, because the official launch of the book is actually on Monday coming up. That's when they're going to be sent out to everybody. Now, when we had David on our podcast, that was probably about 2 years ago now we last had him on the show. But he was talking about the fact that he was writing this book. It's took him, a year of blood, sweat and tears.
And it's written. You know, I've actually been reading some of it, and I must say it's absolutely fantastic. I've heard a lot of these tales from David before when he's been drinking. But,
After a few glasses of wine.
Yeah, totally.
David doesn't drink.
But there's some fantastic stuff. Like, it's not just David in this book. There's lots of contributors. And I'd say, I'm only halfway through, but I absolutely love RJ Michael's chapter. It's just insane.
Now, that took RJ probably about 6 months to write it, I think. And again, after he'd done it, he was really proud of it, and he reckons it's the best thing he's ever written.
Yeah, and he flips the whole story on its head.
Yeah.
Completely flips it on its head. And there's so many different perspectives. It kind of draws a picture of Commodore that we never had before.
Well, that's the whole aim of this book. Is, there's been obviously books like Brian Bagnall's series of books that are really good. Kind of an external commentator looking at Commodore as a company. But it's the first book that's been written by, well, actually a group of people who were there right in the centre of it all and working there as well. So that's kind of the idea of this book. If you want to get, as the title suggests, the inside story about what really happened. I mean, I was reading Dave Haney's chapter the other day that's really in depth. He tells a lot of good stories in there.
Yes, it's like, people in the company who are engineers and artists and stuff like this. And it kind of, they all have their own angle.
And they're not just like the people that you've probably heard stories from a million times before on podcasts and YouTube. There's a chapter in there by Gail Wellington, who was the head of the developer community, CATS, and Beth Richards, who worked on stuff like the unreleased CD 1200 drive that we actually did a little documentary on a couple of years ago on YouTube.
Yeah, and I'd say David doesn't hold back in this.
No.
Not at all. So, there's some really, really interesting stories there.
So to celebrate the launch of the book, we're actually giving you a chance to win a couple of copies of it for free. Now, not only will you get a hardback copy of Commodore The Inside Story, signed by the man himself, but also will include the accompanying Blu-ray disc as well, which, now I worked with David on the Blu-ray. It's actually an interview that I conducted with him. The original idea was that it was going to be an hour long. It's turned out it's about an hour and 40. There's a lot in there. And he actually remembered some stories after we'd done it, so there's about half an hour's worth of extra bits on there too.
Oh, wow.
We've got a documentary by Kim Justice all about Jack Tramiel. So really you're getting about 3.5 hours worth of video footage.
I can't wait to see that.
It's really, really, really impressed with the way it came out. Again, got to thank our Waveland Studio, Steve Fletcher, who filmed it all and put all that together. And also you will get a copy of Everybody's Girlfriend on CD.
Which was a kind of a strange thing where David made an Amiga-based band, right, that kind of sang songs about Amigas.
Well, this came out, it was after the Amiga, after Commodore closed down. He made an album in, I think it was 1995. I don't know if you people do remember seeing him at, Amiga shows, selling it the year after Commodore went under. And essentially it was an ode to the Amiga, an entire album. It's not computer music, but I think he used an Amiga 4000 to tie all the studio together, and there's a track on there dedicated to Jay Minor, and this has been out of print since 1995, but he's actually got them repressed again. So if you've never heard the album, it's actually a really good listen. So we'll give a few copies of that away as well. So essentially what you'll win is a copy of the book, copy of the Blu-ray, and the CD as well. And we've got a few CDs for runners-up as well. So if you want to win, all you've got to do is head to our website at some point in the next 7 days. Now, theretrohour.com, you'll find a little form there. Fill in your details. No question or anything like that. Just put your name in there, your email address. And we're going to close the competition next Friday night. So that'll be Friday, the 21st of September at midnight. After that, next day, we'll pick out a few winners at random from a randomly generated list. We'll get back in touch with you. If you're selected, you'll win a copy of the book, Blu-ray and CD. So you can get the entry form and all the terms and conditions right now on our website at theretrohour.com.
Now, we'd like to thank our donators, because without our donators, this show doesn't go ahead. We've kind of got costs and, websites. I'm doing the new website at the moment, actually, and it's actually progressing, isn't it? Slowly.
We've been saying that for about 6 months, but we are getting there. We're getting there. But again, we said this the other week, it's really for the cost of a cup of coffee. once a month, you could keep this podcast going into 2019. We've got some very big plans for the next 12 months of the show. So your support is really, really appreciated. So thank you so much. If you've made a donation, and any amount, big or small, all you've got to do is head to our website. You'll find PayPal and cryptocurrency links on the front page of the retrohour.com. And for doing that, you will find your place on our high score table, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Just like
Greg Girk,
Magnus Espiona,
Richard Legg,
and Christopher Nelson, who all made donations into the running of the show, and you can do the same at theretrohour.com. Now, before our Atari special with Bill Rehbock, we've got a few stories we just want to cover this week. Did you ever think that you would see Portal on the Commodore 64?
No, I did not. And it's interesting because Portal's a 3D game.
Yeah.
And this is a side-on kind of platformer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Portal, anyone that has played like puzzle games over the last decade will know about that game. By Valve, 2 games in the Portal series. I'm a big fan of Portal, actually. I think they're great games.
I think they're great. I did get a bit travel sick from them, but I think they're great, and I love the music as well.
The cake is alive.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I mean, obviously a very, very famous game. But now, this is a little tweet that we spotted during the week by Jamie Fuller. There's a few guys involved in this as well. Del Seymour, who's a very good Commodore 64 graphics artist. They've actually done a very faithful 2D side-on game of Portal on the C64. Now, there's a little clip they released on Twitter. It's only about a minute long, but it shows you a bit of the gameplay. And looking at it, all the physics are kind of there. So, with Portal, you shoot it's like a blue one, isn't it? And a red portal.
Yeah.
And you walk through one, you come out the other side. And
it transports you to different parts of the room or kind of,
And you get blocks and stuff that can fall through it and all that. You've got to get around walls and that kind of thing. So from this really small clip that we've seen, they do demonstrate that, shooting a portal into a wall, coming out another part of the level and that kind of thing.
That's so cool.
So it looks like it'll actually work really well.
So they've had Atari for the 2600, Portal for the C64. When are we going to get Crisis for the Spectrum? That's what I need to know.
Someone's going to take up that challenge now. Yeah. Jim Bagley will be listening. Hang on a minute. So, I mean, we've always said on the show, we love it when games that really should not be on these platforms eventually turn up on there. And the thing about it is, I mean, companies like Valve, I imagine, will look at this and be like, oh, that is neat. They're very rarely get arsy about it, do they?
Love that, yeah.
And apparently there's even a little rumour that it might have mouse controls on there as well. So
nice.
If the joystick, you're thinking, how's that going to be quick enough to do these kind of intricate puzzles? But yeah, that's really cool to see Portal on an old school system. So we'll keep an eye on that. And when we get a release date, we'll of course let you know. Probably have a little play on YouTube as well, no doubt. Another game that was actually from back in the day that we never thought would see the light of day. Obviously, Psygnosis, what a company they were.
Psygnosis were absolutely huge, and they were such a good publisher on the kind of Amiga, on the Mega Drive, and then they moved on to the PlayStation, and they were one of the only companies that moved on to the PlayStation that kind of still kept relevant and did amazingly cool titles like
Wipeout, obviously.
Wipeout, of course, but really fun stuff like Shipwrecked as well. And I've been playing quite a lot of early Psygnosis games, Destruction Derby. All of those. Well, this game was called Hardcore, and it was basically Lost. It was created by DICE.
Digital Illusions, actually.
Yes,
Someone said that to me the other day. They were like, I was talking to someone else, and he said, I didn't realise that Digital Illusions are, DICE are still going today. And I'm like, yeah, they were the guys that made, Pinball Dreams and Pinball Fantasies and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't realise that they're actually the same company.
No.
Been going since 1992, so it's...
Well, they made this game in 94, and it was supposed to come out for the Amiga, Sega Mega Drive, and the Mega CD.
Yeah.
But then they put it on hold because they wanted to shift focus to the PlayStation. So they had maybe 90% of it done.
It was in that transitional period, wasn't it?
Yeah, and 2D platformers were not the popular thing to be doing then.
No.
So they'd totally forgotten it. But now this company is reviving it, strictly limited games, and they're saying we intend to finish the game and we want it to be played how it was meant to be played. So they're getting the original developers and they're talking to them and they're adding missing levels in there, and they're basically making everything beautiful and handled with care so you can get the best possible experience. And Hardcore was supposed to be quite a good game. If you remember stuff that came out at the time, what was that one? Assassin?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of got that look as well, but then it seems to have a bit of a Turrican look as well.
Yeah, the gun control reminds me of Turrican 2. And there's also a bit in there about, remember Alien 3, that game, the platformer?
Yeah.
A lot of it kind of reminds me of that kind of look as well, but
then it's got that like metal-y kind of beautiful look that you had on like Leander or on Brutal Sports Deluxe, the Speedball 2.
Yeah.
It's got that kind of beautiful look. But they're saying it's basically going to be released in 2019 on the PS4.
Yeah.
And on the PlayStation Vita, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, because the Vita doesn't get a lot of love these days, actually.
No.
But that is awesome. The fact that they've found this game that was kind of lost in time makes you wonder. Because, I mean, you're right there. That was such a change over time, wasn't it? Like, kind of between Amiga, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, and then PS1. They kind of changed everything, and so many companies fell by the wayside. I mean, we did a panel with Mike Montgomery, the Bitmap brothers, didn't we, at Play Expo a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that they just couldn't really keep up. It was like development costs went up.
It was the same with Sensible as well. Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. That project really kind of held them back, and I guess maybe wise decisions like dropping this title might have saved them for a while until they got enveloped by what was it?
Sony. I mean, you're right. Because the Bitmap brothers, Mike was saying that by the time they got, Chaos Engine 2 released onto the market, they sold like a few hundred copies. It was like nothing.
Yeah. I think it's like 4,000 copies.
Yeah, it wasn't very many at all, and they lost a lot of money on it. And looking at it, it was a bad timing thing, really, wasn't it? With hardcore, had that game come out in like '92, that would be on the level of like something like Turrican Name.
Yeah, or Strider or something. It looked really cool.
And the fact they're doing it for the Mega Drive as well, it wasn't just like a
a Mega CD,
Yeah. So very interesting to see it. I'm looking forward to playing it, actually. It does look a really fun game.
So cool. I just need to get a PS4 now.
You're going to buy one just for this game?
No, probably a Vita.
Yeah, you can get those in CEX for about 90 quid.
Well, I think it's probably going to the Vita as well, because a lot of people use emulation stuff on the Vita, and it would just fit in nicely with that. You could probably run an Amiga emulator on there and then switch over to hardcore, I
think that's all anyone uses a Vita for these days. Hack it to death. Although I would like to see this on the Switch. I think that would be good on the virtual console on the Switch.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
A really good fit, actually. So if you want to check out the trailer, I'll put that in this week's show notes. And everything else that we've been talking about at theretrohour.com. Now, just one more story before we get into our interview with Bill Rehbock, all about Atari in the 90s. This caught my attention in the week. Apparently, you can no longer get your PlayStation 2 repaired in Japan.
Yeah, this is absolutely crazy. Like, the PlayStation 2 was released in 2000.
Yeah.
And
18 years ago.
18 years ago, and they've been keeping this repair service alive in Japan. I would think that Sony would have dropped something like that because they wanted them to all break so people would upgrade.
Yeah. You wouldn't imagine they want you to keep a PlayStation 2. Surely they'd rather you bought a PS4 these days. I mean, you can buy a new one for 20 quid.
It's mad, though. The Japanese PlayStation Clinic has shut down. But I just can't believe that. Maybe it was so popular in Japan because it was the first DVD system.
Yeah.
And that may be why people are keeping them alive, because it was the cheapest DVD to get at the time, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, the PlayStation 2 is outright the biggest selling games console of all time.
Yeah.
And there are millions of them out there, millions and millions of them. I mean, that's one of the good things about the PlayStation 2. It is actually a really good system if you want to get into retro collecting.
It is, and you can install a hard drive on there.
Yeah.
And you could also play backups, but I used to see some ridiculously crazy stuff back in the days. There was this one where you replace the CD front.
Yeah.
And you basically had this slot in there. Then you put a credit card in, pulled it right so it kind of locked onto the thing, and then forced the CD drawer open.
That sounds healthy.
And then put the disc in and closed it. And that was sold as like a kit for your PlayStation. It was crazy.
I remember some people would get a kit where you'd slice the top of the PlayStation open to do the swap trick on the fat PlayStation.
Because I remember some people had like top lids on them as well and stuff. Yeah, crazy. Maybe that's why they need repairing, because people have been ripping them to bits all these years.
But the reaction on Twitter, a lot of people have been like, they've pulled the plug in it now as well. One guy tweeted here, he goes, as of today, the PS2 and I've got something in common. We both died. But it's like, the fact that...
I'd just be like, why were they doing it? Why were they still spending money on repairing a console that's so old?
But apparently they weren't doing PS3 and PS Vita repairs still, only PS2, which is like, does that mean the PlayStation 2 outlived the PS3? Which
maybe they just forgot about this department, and there's these guys just working around like, have we still got a job? I don't know, it's 2017. Let's see.
Well, they've got 155 million PlayStation 2s out there. I suppose that's quite a lot to repair, isn't it, if anything goes wrong? But as of now, rest in peace, PS2. I'm sure we've said that on the show about 4 times now.
It's mad, though. I still find this crazy. It's like, what, was Sony trying to cement the reputation of the PS2? It's like already sold worldwide massively.
Yeah.
There's no need.
About time they let it go. But I still find my PS2 open. It is such a great console, isn't it? But the thing about it is, I don't think I'll probably ever play every PlayStation 2 game, even that I own in my life, let alone. So you can get them for so cheap. I mean, I was at a game shop the other day and they're selling them off for like 20p.
All I'm saying is Burnout Takedown. That was such a good game.
My cousin's little boy, I guess he's like my half-cousin, he's only like 6 years old, and they've given him a PS2 because they thought he was a bit young to get like a modern system. But we were playing that game the other day, actually. So, he's a big PS2 fan, so I always enjoy going around and playing it.
Yeah, I love the Burnout series.
Yeah, what a console. So thank you for checking out all the news in this week's podcast. We'll have more for you next Friday. If you are coming along to Cambridge, we are going to be at the Retro Computer Festival this weekend. We'll put links on our Facebook and Twitter at Retro Hour UK. Don't forget, if you need to manually listen to this week's show, do it on Audio Boom, not SoundCloud. We're moving you over there. Find all those links and everything else we talked about this week, and you'll get all that on our website, theretrohour.com. Right then, let's get into the story of Atari in the 90s. Talking about the Jaguar, the Falcon, the Lynx, lots of stuff you've not heard about before, with this week's special guest, Bill Rehbock. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest. It is one for the Atari fanboys this week. Please welcome to the show, Bill Rehbock. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ravi and Dan.
Thank you so much for coming on. Now, obviously, we did mention in the lead-up to this that we are both big fans of the Jaguar and the Falcon and systems like that we can't wait to get some stories from you. I mean, before you started working at Atari, I mean, how much of an Atari fan were you?
Well, that was the home computer that I kind of grew up on. Back in 1978, to date myself a bit, one of my friends in high school, his neighbor ran security at McCormick Place, and the summer consumer electronics show was going on, and we had kind of gotten recruited to do a little summer job work to work at McCormick Place and help out with the Consumer Electronics Show. And we were assigned, fortunately, or just by fate, I guess, to help out with the Atari booth, and it was make sure that nothing's getting stolen during the night or whatever. But the folks from Atari had said that if we wanted, we could play on some of the computers that were there, or the Atari 2600 systems that they had set up. Star Raiders had just gotten introduced, and I wound up playing Star Raiders for many hours across the the course of the evening. Make a long story short, came back the following day after I had gone home, cleaned up, and was able to play the game, kind of demoing it all during the course of the show. At the end of it, my friend and I were given by the Atari guys as kind of a, hey, they're breaking down the booth, and here, you guys can have a couple of these. So that was my first Atari 800, and that was my friend's first Atari 800 also. During college, I became an Atari developer. As things progressed, I realized that this whole Atari thing with the SLM 804 laser printer for the Atari ST was a pretty amazing setup, and I had a consulting business, mainly PC focused, selling things like Ventura Publisher, which was a really, really expensive piece of software for the PC, but based on DRI's GEM version of the operating system for the PC. So I was very familiar with GEM in the first place on the PC side of things, but had a lot of clients that also wanted, the kind of tried and true WordPerfect and Microsoft Word and such. And for those customers, I introduced them to the Atari computer because a 520 ST with the SLM 804 was cheaper than buying a PC with Ventura Publisher, of course.
It had that lovely high-res screen mode as well, didn't it? That was good for DTP.
The 10-inch or 12-inch black and white paperwhite monitor was fantastic, right? And it was like half the price of an Apple, because Atari had chosen an MS-DOS file format for the floppy disks. It was very easy for people to take the disk from the PC and pop it in the Atari, and then be able to do their desktop publishing over there.
That's one thing people often forget, just how expensive PCs and Macs were around that time.
Oh, exactly. And I was selling among, the first PC clones, back in the day. And often I would order PCs from PCs Limited, which was the precursor to Dell. Right. So, I'm unbeknownst to me at the time, I'm ordering computers from Michael Dell in his dorm room, in Texas. Right. But they were still very expensive compared to the cost of the Atari, as well as ease of use and everything else. Right. So I had clients that would take their WordPerfect documents, move it over to the Atari, do their desktop publishing, make it look nice, do their newsletters and things like that. And bottom line is, I wound up being one of Atari's larger value-added resellers in the U.S. Ultimately, what wound up happening was Charles Cherry, who was the head of developer relations at the time, had left Atari to take a job with Yoast Group, which was the beginning days of Autodesk. Antonio Salerno, who was his boss, gave me a call and said, we were looking for somebody to head up developer relations at Atari, and your name kept coming up. So I thought I should give you a call. Would you be interested? And ultimately, took the job, moved out to California between September of 1990 and then fully moved out in February of 1991 with my wife. But as the PC clone market kind of got more and more entrenched, and I can remember Trammell saying, it's going to get tougher and tougher because, the margins are getting squeezed really really skinny. Hey, let's go ahead and do our last run at a gaming system. The timing seemed pretty right, and that's pretty much how Jaguar was born.
What's quite interesting to me there is, though, people often think back on Atari and they always talk about the game systems and kind of regard it as like a games company. But I know for a while, Jack really did try and reposition it as a computer company for a few years in the late 80s, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, very much. And, and the amazing thing was the team at Atari Germany, Alvin Stumpf and Norman Kovalevsky was head of developer relations there. And Dr. Hans Riedel was also heading business relationships and developer relations. What was amazing, and a lot of people don't realize, is that like companies like Volkswagen had many Atari computers that they were doing like actual company, corporate, enterprise business work on. And I never actually saw an issue that had allegedly been published, but supposedly Playboy Germany was published on Atari computers for some time.
That's a claim to fame.
Yeah, which is really, if you could find one of those copies, it'd be a heck of a collector's item, right?
Well, you mentioned Jack there as well, and kind of what was he like when you first met him? Was he quite intimidating? And what was the atmosphere like? Was it kind of a big family business?
Yes and no. I always had a fantastic relationship with Jack and Sam and Leonard and Gary and everybody. And the thing was that, Jack was a brilliant guy who could arrive at a conclusion way faster than almost anybody in the room. And that was intimidating for a lot of people because, he would be kind of at the end of the story as everybody was still playing catch up, right? But my favorite anecdotes about Jack was that shortly after I had started, I was told that I was going to be going to CeBIT, and I was, the new guy, had come in from Chicago. it was a situation where I didn't officially have an administrative assistant, quite yet or anything like that. So I arranged my travel arrangements really quick through a what was known at the time as a bucket shop that did discount airfares. They were sort of the equivalent of Priceline and such, but back in the 1990s, before the internet, before Al Gore invented the internet. And so I got what I thought was a very good deal on a plane ticket to get over to ultimately to Hanover. And Jack wanted to know why I was making my own reservations. I said, well, it's just kind of trying to scramble because there's not a lot of time and, really quick. And he called his admin, Kathy, in and said, double check, make sure Mr. Rehbock has a great, is getting a good airfare. Check KLM and, whatever other airlines. And we, during the 5 minutes that it took her, to go ahead and check, it was kind of the first time that Jack and I got to talk, and hey, I grew up in Chicago, and he's, I grew up in Europe, and through the course of the conversation, had really, learned what him and his wife had been through, through Auschwitz and stuff like that. Kathy, and then the funniest part about it was Jack jokingly, what I thought jokingly, had said, and by the way, if this airfare that you got is better than what we can get for you, I'm going to buy a ticket for your wife to go too. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he said, but I can't remember exactly how it came out, but it was something like, but again, tongue in cheek, he says, but if you if my airfare is cheaper, then you pay for the airfare or something, right? And I'm like, and he said, are you willing to take that bet? And again, the cocky kid from Chicago is like, yeah, okay, sure, why not?
I bet he loved that though.
Yeah, oh no, right, exactly. So, and lo and behold, my airfare was cheaper.
Thankfully.
So on my very first business trip with Atari, you ask about, was it kind of like a family business? Well, my wife got to go, so for me it was. But the other thing that was really fascinating was the great relationship that Sam Trammell had with like Iri Majiri from Sega, for instance. And Sam and I went to Tokyo on a business meeting, and we're meeting with the head of Sega, and it was so funny because as the video game industry progressed, there used to be the sort of wars between Tom Kalinske at Sega and Howard Lincoln at Nintendo and things like that. And people hear about how Atari and businesses war and things like that, but it was the relationships that that Atari had at the highest level with these other companies was really amazing to watch.
Well, I mean, before we get into the Jaguar era, I mean, the kind of the end of the computer range of Atari was the Atari Falcon. And we had Daryl Still, formerly of Atari UK on the show last year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was saying, his jaw dropped when he saw that machine. He thought it was brilliant, but obviously it wasn't the success that Atari hoped it would be. I mean, when did you hear about that machine originally, and what did you think of the Falcon?
Obviously with the TT-030, it was great, having the Motorola 68030 in that, and the VME bus expansion, which a couple different companies, actually mostly in Europe, built extension graphics cards for and things like that. But when the Falcon came out, it was the combination of the 68040 CPU, but more importantly, as well as the Motorola 56K DSP that was in there, right? And here was Atari making lightning strike twice, where the original Atari 520, 1040 and Mega ST competed with Apple. Here was the Falcon 040 was essentially awfully close to being a next cube, in a keyboard computer, kind of format. What was remarkable about it was the software support came from the fact that it had the 56K DSP on there, and the software that we got developed for it, like Falcon D2D, which was a direct-to-disc recording application, Learnout and Houseby, who were the really kind of the trailblazers in text-to-speech and speech recognition. And we had that software, running on the Falcon. And a lot of the people in academia were really excited about it because it was a great computer at a surprisingly low price that brought sort of next-level computing performance to, a great audience of programmers. Back at the 25th anniversary of Commodore, somebody in the crowd had made some kind of remark about, the price difference and profit margins of Atari versus Apple. Jack Tramiel made the comment that, the big thing about Atari was that Atari made computers affordable, or not Atari at the time, Commodore. So back when Jack was CEO of Commodore, the Commodore had done a great job of making computers available to many more users because the price was so much lower than Apple.
Computers for the masses, not the classes, I believe he used to say, didn't it?
Absolutely, precisely. And sort of that's what the Falcon was all about. Now the funny thing was that, it happened to be at a time when the Intel 486 was coming along, and the 486 with a math coprocessor and things like that. Those just wound up being so dirt cheap that it was hard for Falcon, and obviously it ultimately was difficult for Next to even be able to survive. But the one funny thing on that note was that we actually had a meeting with Next. And this wasn't with Steve Jobs at Next. It was with their VP of Business Development or something. And, and the comment that the guy from Next had made to us at Atari was Next was making atrociously expensive hardware with a really good operating system, which incidentally is kind of what the Mac is built on today, right? Because Mach came back to Apple ultimately when Steve moved back over to Apple and everything. But the comment that he made was that Next was making atrociously expensive hardware with a brilliant operating system, and Atari was building brilliantly inexpensive hardware with kind of a weird operating system, because the DRI Gem thing, everybody always kind of, even from a digital research perspective, was a little bit of a head scratcher. And Eric Smith at Atari was the guy that wrote the multitasking version of TOS, which was Mint, and all that, which was a great version of Gem for the Atari. But like, for instance, at the end of the day, the Atari computers had difficulty networking because the actual file I/O part of the operating system wasn't reentrant and things like that for the longest time. So Atari kind of had a little bit of a late start, on the networking side of things. But for Next to be looking at it saying, hey, this would be kind of cool hardware to run Next OS on was pretty complimentary, right?
Absolutely. Well, after the Falcon, obviously Atari turned its eyes back to games consoles. And originally we had the Panther project, didn't we, that then turned into Jaguar. I mean, when did you first hear about this, and how did that development kind of start?
Well, I remember going through the lab and having Leonard do some of the original demos, which basically were, just blown everybody away. Sort of one of my favorite stories about the Jaguar was the fact that, after I had left Atari and wound up going over to Sony, I was talking to Yamamoto-san that had said that they could remember when the Jaguar first shipped, and the folks at Sony Computer Entertainment had gotten their hands on one, because we had begun selling Jaguar through distribution in Japan in December when PlayStation 1 first started shipping in Japan. So they already had built PlayStation 1 and were committed to it. And then they got their hands on a Jaguar. And he said that Ken Kutaragi and him and the rest of the engineering team took apart the Jaguar and were shocked that, and I think the number that he used was that there were only like 42 components, and that the Jaguar was so elegantly architected, with the Tom and Jerry chip and sort of the Motorola 68000 was in there, but other than those three chips, basically everything else was minimal support kind of circuitry, And Sony was blown away by a lot of the aspects of Jaguar, right? Now the one thing that Jaguar didn't have was a fully fledged graphics transform engine for doing 3D, but Jaguar also, by coincidence, was like almost the perfect hardware for Doom.
Yeah.
So and I was the guy that kind of stumbled into getting Doom on Jaguar, which was pretty cool.
So did you feel that the Atari Jaguar was limited by the car? And we all know the CD system was kind of coming out later. Was there a lot of hopes for the CD add-on?
Well, there was, but at the same time, you had Nintendo that was sort of already fighting the fight about cartridge versus CD in terms of load times and things like that, right? Even kind of leading up to multimedia on PCs, a lot of the use of CD wound up being used for movie playback, for interstitials, and for having a CDR soundtrack, right? For instance, even Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure on Windows 95, ultimately, 90% of the CD was a CD audio soundtrack that, rumor had it, was basically the Jaguar synth version of the soundtrack, just committed to CDDA audio. So the interesting thing was that for the most part, even a lot of developers that we were working with didn't see the cartridge as that much of a limitation. And for instance, also, like one of the first things that I had to deal with when I left Atari and went to Sony was the fact that the CD mechanisms on the PlayStation 1 were essentially getting worn out by Resident Evil, because they were treating, Resident Evil as a game basically treated the CD-ROM mechanism on the PlayStation 1 as a hard disk, and the seeks, of the CD mechanism going back and forth across the disk were literally wearing out the CD-ROM mechanism. So as Jaguar shipped, the jury was really kind of still out on how good CD was going to be. So, as we were working with companies like Imagitech Designs and, the Kingsley brothers at Rebellion, nobody was really too worried about the cartridge thing. And then we knew that, hey, we've got a CD-ROM design, working. If the whole CD thing really did catch on, it could be addressed, eventually.
I guess developers were used to developing for maybe 2 floppy disks and then having 800 megabytes to fill on a CD. It was quite extra resources to do that, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it absolutely was. And like I said, if you look at a lot of the, even the PlayStation 1 games that first came out, a lot of them were basically cartridge games plus movie data as filler. So it wasn't that big of a deal, right? Like Jumping Flash for PlayStation 1 practically could have been done for Jaguar.
Well, the Jag port of Doom is considered one of the best console ports just ever. How did you approach it, and how did you get them to do such a good conversion?
Well, what had happened was I was up at LucasArts doing a demo of Jaguar, and that was the meeting where I got to know Kelly Flock, who wound up being also at Sony at the same time that I was eventually. and I was doing a demo, and one of the guys at LucasArts was, I think he was a tester for Doom, or maybe he just had a pirated copy of a beta of it. Don't know. But anyway, he pulls me into his office and says, "You got to check out this really cool new game that's in development that's going to be coming out in a couple months." And it was original Doom on PC. And I went back to the office and I cold called id Software down in Mesquite, Texas, and wound up talking to Jay Wilbur. Got on a plane the following day or two, did a demo of Jaguar. And the one complaint that John Carmack had about Jaguar was he wished it had more RAM. He wasn't so much worried about the cartridge space, but he wished it had more RAM. And at the time, part of the pitch about Jaguar was that it could do kind of pretty cool procedural textures and things like that, whatever. And he said, I'm not a big fan of that, but give me more memory and a good artist, and I can do wonders. But what was really funny is that ultimately John wound up so enamored with Jaguar that he wound up taking advantage of the CRY lighting model to be able to do the really, really good shading, down the hallways in Doom, which wound up actually being better than the PC version. But John, bless his heart, wrote his own compiler for the Tom chip. He had a little kernel that swapped code segments into Tom, and ported the entire Doom engine to Jaguar pretty handily. But the best part of the whole project was that it was like on a Friday he had submitted one of the major milestones for Doom, put it up on a server for me to download, and I'm looking at it, and then Monday morning I had sent him an email, with a couple comments about that build of Doom, and then he said, "Oh, and by the way, take a look at the server. There's a little something up there for you, because I'd put to bed the milestone release that I sent you on Friday, and I put a pile of discs in my CD changer, and after a couple, like an all-nighter and a half, you'll see what I built." And Wolfenstein was up there. Now, we had not done a deal for Wolfenstein, right? So, it was like, wow, this is, and it was fantastic.
It's a
right?
Great version on the Jag.
Yeah. So it was like it was amazing. And for a long time, it was the last console version of Doom that John did, because John did not do the 32X version. Sega basically was forced to do the 32X version of Doom. I can't remember who did the PlayStation version of Doom ultimately, but it wasn't John, and to my knowledge, the version of Doom on Jaguar was the last console coding that John kind of single-handedly did for a while.
That was a great advert for the Jag as well, because I remember seeing it. Obviously, we've had Rebecca Heinemann on the show before, and the 3DO version was fraught with disaster. But when you compared them side by side, that was the best advert for the Jag that you'd see at the time.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely amazing. So that was a lot of fun and pretty cool, and we got a great deal on Wolfenstein, because it was like, hey, I finished the game. Would you, are you interested in publishing that also, right? So
another title that we just can't miss out is Alien vs. Predator. So that was one of the main games that really attracted me to it. How did that work out, and how did you get the deal for such a huge title?
Well, I can't remember. I don't really recall exactly how the licensing for it went, but the bottom line was that Atari, because of the Atari connection into Warner Brothers, had a lot of good, there was always a lot of good relationship on the movie studio side of things. And I don't, if you remember on Atari Lynx, we had Batman and a couple other movie properties that showed up on Lynx, like Bill and Ted and stuff like that. I mean, I got to give I got to give credit to John Scrutch and his guys managing, the relationship with Rebellion, and Jason and Chris Kingsley, who were a relatively little studio at the time, but a shout out goes to them because Battlezone that they did for PSVR and is one of the earliest VR games right now is one of my favorite VR games still. But doggone it, those guys did such an amazing job. The audio team in Sunnyvale, James Grunke and the guys that did the sound effects and the background sounds and the breaking of bones and all of that are all of the things that did such a fantastic job of contributing to the creepiness of that game.
Oh, it was a really scary game, actually, I thought.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And it was a system seller as well. I mean, I knew kids at school that wanted a Jag just to play that game because it looked so good.
Oh yeah, exactly. And the whole, the amazing part about it was that was the beginning of the Alien versus Predator franchise, right? Which still holds up, today.
Well, were there any unreleased titles that have been in development for the Jaguar that kind of went by the wayside that you remember?
Yeah, frankly, at this point, there were a lot of titles that still get talked about on the message boards and things like that. Varunas Forces was a title that I was very much looking forward to. There were a couple other racing games in the wings. Miracle Designs had already started on kind of a sequel to Atari carts, that would have been cool if that would have been released. Oh gosh, I feel bad because I can't remember the name of it, but the space game that Scott Legrand eventually did release, right? So it got released after the fact, but and that there's one where as Atari was winding down and selling the IP to Hasbro back in the day, it was Leonard Trammell that was instrumental in getting all of the necessary IP released into the public domain, so that so that those games and so that all of the homebrew stuff for the Jaguar could be done. But I at the time I had introduced Leonard to Scott Legrand. And Leonard was the guy that was gracious enough to make all basically what is known now as the Jaguar homebrew scene exist, be able to happen legally.
Well, I've been collecting for the Jag for a couple of years now. It's in fact the only system I really collect for, and I did get a game that's kind of a bit of a holy grail for Jaguar collectors recently, and that was Atari carts. Which is actually pretty expensive now. I think I got mine for about £150 off eBay.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I haven't told my wife that, but yeah, I'm sure I'll listen to this. But what was kind of the background on that? I mean, I imagine it was response to Mario Kart on the SNES, but that was really interesting concept. Having even the naming, the fact that it was called Atari Carts.
Well, yeah, and from a tech standpoint, Philip Haukeet and Peter Vermeulen at Miracle Designs. Had gotten their dev kit and just, kind of seeing what it could do and seeing how much they could stretch the capabilities. And they sent over to Jay Patton and I a Mode 7 emulator that essentially emulated the Super NES Mode 7 graphics on Jaguar, which everybody looked at and was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And they were like, yeah, we think we could kind of do a combination of F-Zero and Mario Kart, right? And that's really kind of how the spec of the game, came to be. I think I can take credit for it being my idea to sort of incorporate Bentley Bear and try to kind of pull some of the other Atari IP, into the game. And we did a couple different treatments on the characters. and thought, keep it kind of cutesy. And, we had already done, we'd already had Doom going, that introduced Atari to Joseph Lieberman, and sort of the beginnings of the ESRB and ESA back in the day. So Atari Cart wanted to be a very, very family friendly, kind of E for everyone game. And but the guys at Miracle Designs built it, and not only did Mode 7, but did Mode 7 with undulating terrain, which Mode 7 didn't support. So it was kind of like Mode 7 Plus, which was pretty cool.
We're talking of technical achievements on the Jaguar. I mean, did you ever use the Jag VR?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, at the very, very first E3 is where that debuted, and that was based on the virtuality Jonathan Waldron concept of being able to do VR. And it worked surprisingly well. And again, if you kind of think about the way that the LED tracking, worked on Jaguar VR, look how long it took for VR to actually catch up, right? So it was, again, kind of, even that aspect of it was way before its time.
Well, with these technical achievements and the really good port of Doom and games like Atari Karts, it did kind of feel like the Jaguar was really kind of finding its stride around that time. But did the market performance and sales of the Jaguar disappoint the team?
Depending on who you talk to, everybody has sort of their different reasons for why the Jaguar wasn't as successful as it could have been. My personal take was that if I could do it all again, I might have held off probably the 3 months that it might have taken to fix the one bug in the TOM chip that did make it kind of difficult for a lot of developers, was the fact that the jump instruction was a little bit broken. And it's why guys like John Carmack had to write their own compiler to swap code in and out of the TOM chip, because my recollection was that if you executed a jump instruction when the program counter was inside Jaguar memory, inside the TOM memory, and you jumped to an external memory location, and then you returned the internal memory location, you didn't necessarily land at the same address space that you would expect. But what you could do is you could use the blitter on TOM to blit in blocks of code really fast into the TOM chip. So that was kind of the workaround. So that was one of the quirks that my recollection was the developers complained the most about, right? But frankly, I think the other thing that probably affected Jaguar more than anything else was the fact that due to manufacturing issues that we had with IBM, the whole goal of Jaguar was to build it in the United States, and it was basically built by IBM's Lexmark division. They had some serious issues kind of getting everything going. And the thing that I remember was that there was a well more than 100,000 unit order to Walmart that we missed because IBM didn't deliver. And I'm sure that engineers at IBM would, on the manufacturing side, would blame Atari, because this wasn't as manufacturable as it should be, whatever, right? I mean, that's, it's always finger pointing. But the bottom line is you miss a purchase order with Walmart and you don't deliver it on time, they cancel the PO. Even with the little bug that I complain about in the TOM chip, had Jaguar shipped at Walmart for that first critical Christmas season, would things have played out differently? I don't know.
And I guess that really did affect it then. 'Cause, I mean, the console market was so oversaturated at that point, wasn't it? There was a new machine coming along every 6 months.
Oh yeah, exactly. And PlayStation, and at that point in the U.S., rumors were of PlayStation over in Japan, and nobody knew exactly how quickly Sony would get PlayStation from Japan over to the U.S. Right? Nobody really realized at that point that it was going to be a full 12 months before PlayStation landed in the U.S. So yeah, it was just kind of a hot mess in the market in terms of consoles.
I mean, just as we wind up the Jaguar story, Bill, because I know you're a bit pressed for time, but I mean, you and the guys from ex-Atari workers did actually work on kind of the spiritual successor to the Jaguar on the Nuon, which was an interesting concept. How did you get involved in that? And for people that might not know, what was the Nuon all about?
Yeah, so as at the time it was called Project X, and this was a couple years after I had left Atari and was already at Sony, and Richard Miller had started up VM Labs. The product was just called Project X at the time. We knew that the world knew that Jeff Minter was probably going to be doing a game for it, which would be pretty cool. But the other really, really important part about it was the notion of DVD was like in its infancy, right? And even to some extent, there were competing DVD formats that were still sort of being worked their way through from Sony. So Sony had their format, that was essentially an extended version of CD. Toshiba and Warner Brothers were promoting what would become the DVD standard. There was a company called DivX, not to be confused with the with the streaming compression format DivX. Mm-hmm. There was a company called DivX that wanted to do their version of disposable discs that you could basically rent a movie and then throw the disc out because it could only be played once and things like that. So in the consumer electronics space, it was very interesting. I had been working at Sony for a couple of years at that point, had gotten to know what it was like, working for a Japanese consumer electronics manufacturer. The thing that was interesting about VM Labs was that this was going to be a interactive, a processor that you would replace your Zoran or C-Cube video decoder, in a DVD player that you were building, that would also be able to do very good DVD playback, be able to do advanced fast forward and rewind. I mean, the thing that was kind of remarkable about VM Labs Nuon equipped DVD players was that you could do like super slow-mo, and you could, for DVD players at that time, to be able to play at 1.5x speed with pitch-corrected, fast-forwarded audio was an amazing kind of thing that it's interesting because in the streaming space, everybody has kind of abandoned a bunch of those really amazing features that Nuon had. And a lot of those features that Nuon had would work streaming content like Netflix, right? So imagine if Netflix allowed you to do a fast, smooth shuttle forward or rewind so that when you skipped a spot or you wanted to watch it again, be able to do that. So again, VM Labs was kind of way ahead of its time, but the interactivity of it was pretty cool too, and we wound up doing Merlin Racing, which was the sort of spiritual successor of Atari Karts. Jeff did another version of VLM, the virtual light machine, that was just incredible. And the games that we wound up doing for it actually stood the test of time for over 6 months that I paid attention to as VM Labs had gotten sold to Genesis Microchip and was basically out of the Nuon business. Nuon DVD players actually did continue to sell, and the software for them continued to sell for over 6 months at places like Best Buy. Which was a testament to the developers that made those games and the capability that it had. But back in that day, the idea was that a DVD player that you bought from Toshiba and a DVD player that you bought from Samsung and a DVD player maybe that you bought from RCA should all be able to play the same interactive content. Which is weird because it's a place that the video game industry still seeks to get to. In the meantime, Microsoft is still making their own thing, and Nintendo's still making their own thing, and Sony is still making their own thing.
And I was pleased recently that Jeff did a new version of Tempest for the PlayStation 4 as well, because not many people have played Tempest 3000 on the new one, but it was such a good game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we had to go with Jeff's homemade rotary controller, which was so cool.
And then I just actually bought a couple months ago one of the rotary controllers that one of the guys on Facebook is selling. So you can actually buy a rotary controller for Tempest today for, I think it's like $70, which is right in the ballpark of a game controller for a regular console still. That works fantastic with Tempest. So that was really fun to find and got me playing Tempest again.
Have you still got a Jaguar then, and do you play that at all?
Yeah, on and off. I've got the HD. So for the Jaguar, there's an HDMI adapter that plugs into the into the video connector port on the back of it. And again, we talked earlier about the fact that it's incredible that people are making software for it. Yeah. It's incredible that people are still manufacturing peripherals for it, right?
There's a new Pro controller coming, I saw the other day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm dying to see one of those.
Excellent, Bill. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your memories with us this week. What are you up to these days if people want to keep in touch and find out what you're up to?
Oh, yeah. So my sort of main task right now is working with a company called GameFace Labs that's based over in the UK. And we are using the NVIDIA Tegra TX2 SoC in a standalone VR AR headset that will be affordable, should be available for developers right around the first of the year, commercial product for holiday 2019. And the cool part about it is you can either use the GameFace Labs headset, or we're going to be supporting different VR and AR for tabletop gaming kind of experiences. But it is by far the most powerful Android gaming system on the planet, and it's coming along, slowly but surely. But we're making good strides and have about a dozen different development teams lined up for it right now that I'm hoping to be able to announce around GDC next year.
Right, Bill. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
All right, excellent. Thanks so much.